All right, picking up where we left off. A couple of quick notes. Breaking in a new pipe. This is a Peterson 606 in the summertime finish. And this is a Kershaw pipe tool with rose inlay. Kind of cool. Knife, pick. If you can find them on eBay, they're worth picking up. Beautiful little pipe tamper. A little bit larger tamper than a lot of the pipe tools, although it is oval shape. So, where were we? Chapter 5. I think that Louisiana is one of the most bitter states in the Confederacy, or the states that succeeded from the Union. While we were in camp at Carlton, 6 miles up from the Shell Road from the New Orleans, we used to get to the city when we could get a pass. I remember when my comrade and myself got a pass to take in the city of New Orleans. The ladies did not take very kindly to us. I wonder why. When they met us on the sidewalk, they would pick up their skirts and get off the walk and scorn us boys in blue. It was nothing to have a pot or some kind of dish dropped in front of us. It did not make any difference to them what kind of pot. They did this until General Butler issued general orders that any lady who would insult Union soldiers would be considered a common streetwalker. New Orleans is a beautiful city. They have a fine monument of Jackson, which adds a good deal to the city. The city is very low, and the levees are built 8 to 10 feet above the level. They have beautiful shade trees and all kinds of fruit, oranges and lemons, and on both sides of the river. We used to take a boat and go across and get several bushels of fruit. The people down there around New Orleans are mostly of old country French, very polite. Some of the women used to come to our camp peddling mince pies and molasses cakes made out of cornmeal and New Orleans molasses. I was a good customer and bought several mince pies. One day, when eating my pie, I felt something in my mouth, and I pulled it out and found it to be a rat's foot. No pies for me after that. I can imagine. I would not want any mince pies after that either. Be with you in 1 second. The drinking water was poor all through Louisiana. Rainwater caught in wells or cisterns. We found that the best water we could get was the Mississippi River water. We would fill up barrels with it and let it stand overnight. In the morning, there would be 1 or 2 inches of sand in the bottom of the barrel. The current in the Mississippi is so strong that it washes away the banks and makes the water full of sand. Baton Rouge is the capital of Louisiana. The Capitol building was burned down. They had a fort there, and it was necessary to tear down part of the city to give the cannons on the fort range to shoot in case of attack. Baton Rouge is close to the Mississippi River. Beautiful shade trees and fine magnolia groves. Higher up from the river level, our regiment, the 4th Wisconsin, camped for 6 months, and we got well posted with all the surroundings for miles. There was up River Road and down River Road, the Greenville Springs Road, and the Clay Cut Road. We had been on scouts on all 3 roads for 40 miles or more. They had fine plantations, and we had pickets posted all along. We had a stockade for one of the company's 8 miles out on the lower river road, made strong to break attacks coming from New Orleans. You could see all kinds of boats from the Mississippi, packets to our gunboats, and then small boats called corporal boats used for carrying dispatches from our gunboats to flagships. When Sherman marched through Georgia, we were camped at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and were ordered with several other regiments to prepare for a campaign with light artillery to go through to Mobile, Alabama. The country was very hard to go through, as it was nothing but swamps and dense pinery country. The principal business there before the war was making turpentine, and all those trees were tapped and ready for use, but the fire got in ahead of us and burned up most of the forest, and I tell you, there were some pretty black-looking soldiers before we got through the Gulf. We were very short on rations, as there was nothing in that country to forage. But we had enough hardtack and coffee to put us through until we got within 20 miles of Mobile on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. And then we were in luck because we struck a first-class oyster bed and got the tools that were used to rake up the oysters, and had a wagon load of oysters in the shell. And I can tell you that hardtack, coffee, and good big oysters that had to be cut in two to swallow made mighty good eatin'. When we got to the Gulf, we had to wait for the tide to bring in the Gulf ships to take us back to New Orleans. They were out of fuel and we were detailed to cut cordwood to run the ships till they got to New Orleans. It took us a day or more to go to New Orleans, and we landed at Lake Pontchartrain. I never knew why they were sent round to Mobile until after we had read the history. It was to draw the attention of the enemy while Sherman got to the sea. We marched from Lake Pontchartrain up the Shell Road alongside the canal to a place called Carlton, where we went in camp and were there for almost 6 months or more. While there, a good many of the boys were troubled with malaria, and we had a special order issued from the medical department for the cooks to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to cook coffee, and every soldier had to get up and drink a quart of coffee to keep away what they called the miasma, which was a byword among the boys for a long time. Let us have some miasma. While in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the government raised a colored regiment, and they got the residence or stopping place of every Negro. I'm sorry. And they got the residence or stopping place of every Negro old enough to be a good U.S. colored soldier, with headquarters in the city of Baton Rouge. I was detailed with 3 others to notify the Negroes that they were drafted. I was in charge, so I would get my orders and the addresses of every Negro that was on the list. I would give 1 or 2 notices to each soldier, and they would bring them in. I remember one that I went after myself. He was hard to get. He was a half-breed, a mulatto. He had a barber shop with several Negro barbers, as he learned the trade from his master before he was freed. He had lots of money and offered me $500 if I would tear up the notice. I said nothing doing, and he had to come along. We even took all of officers' waiters. My captain's waiter was drafted and made a good soldier. They were a fine-looking bunch when they got Uncle Sam's blue suits. Chapter 6. In 1864, all soldiers from Wisconsin were entitled to vote regardless of age, and I, being less than 18, voted for Abraham Lincoln for his second term. All of the 4th Wisconsin Regiment voted for Abraham Lincoln except one, and he was shot his big toe off to get. He was the one that shot his big toe off to get out of service. While on a raid up the Mississippi to Jackson, we saw lots of relics of war times, dead horses lying along the road, and railroads that run through Jackson were where we saw locomotives bottom side up and railroad track tipped over for miles. And we saw where they would heat the railroad iron in the center, and 4 men would get a hold of the railroad iron, 2 at each end, and they would run it up against a telegraph or telephone post and twist it around the telephone post. This was called Sherman neckties, and in that way the railroad was destroyed. We had several skirmish fights with bushwhackers and some of General Forrest's men. Rebel general. Then we went on to Vicksburg. This was in 1864. We went through the ruins of Vicksburg, and we saw 3 or 4 or 5-story buildings where a cannonball or a shot went from the top clear through to the cellar. And this was done by firing shots from mortars or cannons from the gunboats, which would go up half a mile in the air and then drop. And when the cannonball was nearing the top of the roof, it was going as fast as when it left the muzzle of the gun. Vicksburg is a city built on the Mississippi River on a bend which made a very strong fort, as they had command of the river both ways. The citizens and women lived under the hill where they had dugouts. Some families had 3 or 4 or 5 rooms. We went through several of these places, and they had their furniture and their very comfortable rooms in the underground that was made to protect the family and the children while our forces were firing all kinds of solid shots and shells into the city. It was a horrible looking sight, and you must think what those people were suffering in Vicksburg while that long siege was going on before the surrender. From Vicksburg, we went to Natchez. This also is alongside the Mississippi River, and where we were kept, they called it Natchez under the hill. We stayed there all night and part of the next day, and there was a terrific rainstorm, the worst I think I experienced while I was in the Army. We had nothing to cover ourselves with excepting our poncho rubber blankets, and those were made with holes, so that each soldier could get his head out and place his arms on each side. Each soldier took his saddle and blanket with all the rations he had and piled it on his saddle, then got on his saddle and put his poncho on. It was a great sight in the next morning, the way they looked, with the water running over their feet and their heads sticking out. Looked like a lot of chickens in a rainstorm. The poor horses had nothing to protect them, and they were tied to trees around, and it was pretty near 4 or 5 o'clock the next day before we got our things straightened out enough to saddle up again. That ended our trip in Mississippi. We had with us one of the most comical little Germans, I believe, that I knew. He was always making the boys laugh. One day, we were close to a pond of water where there were a lot of young ducks swimming, and he shot all of them and took them into camp. The party who owned the ducks had seen him and recognized him, so she came over to our company and made a complaint to the Captain Brooks, saying, "One of your men has killed my ducks." Henry was smart enough. He thought that somebody was onto him, so he cut off the heads of the ducks so they lost all resemblance of a duck. And the captain said, "I will get my men into line, and if you can pick out the man, I will punish him." So we were all drawn into a line, and she identified Henry Schmidt, which was his name. The first thing, Henry went in and fetched out his disfigured ducks. He says, "Gol darn it, I didn't shoot your ducks. I shot snipes," meaning I shot snips, meaning snipes. And holding them up, "Do you call them ducks? These are snipes." The party was so taken back that when she went back home without further complaint. Another time, Henry was in line for a surgeon call. He got a sore eye and a very bad sore eye. So when the bugle sounded one morning for a surgeon call, I was in line with a bunch that went up, as we always go to get a drink of the bottle. So the doctor would go along the line and say, "What's the matter with you?" The men would say, "I got pain here," and point to his chest. Another would want his leg or his rib. The doctor would tell them to have a drink, until he came to Henry Schmidt. He didn't look at Henry but say, "What's the matter?" He told Henry to take a drink, but Henry said, "Gol darn it, I don't need a drink for a sore eye." Anyways, that's 5 and 6. I think I'll stop it there and pick up again next time. It's been almost 20 minutes. Hope you guys are still enjoying this. It's a limited audience, but I'm enjoying it. Getting it out there. There's Grandpa, great-great-grandpa. Take care, guys. God bless, and I'll talk to you again soon.